A dry, sharp sound split the air, pop as a soda can burst midair and slammed straight into Emily Harper's chest. The sticky, sugary liquid splattered across her gray sweater, trickled down onto her keyboard, and spread in fizzy trails across the white floor. In an instant, the entire office of Brighton Marketing Group filled with giggles and mocking stares. Vanessa Price, the one who threw the can, crossed her arms with a smug smirk. "Oops, guess you needed a shower, Harper." Laughter rippled through the room like a wave. Blake Turner, the salesman who lived for attention, clapped his hands. "Nice one, Vanessa. That was like a soda commercial." Lydia Brooks lifted her phone, tilted her head, and laughed. "This scene's going straight to TikTok, millions of views for sure." In the middle of it all, Emily sat still. Her dark brown hair clung to her face. Her hands trembled slightly, but she said nothing. The soaked sweater hugged her thin frame, and in her brown, silent eyes burned something different from fear endurance, a quiet dignity surviving in a room full of cruelty. Above her, fluorescent lights reflected off the glass panels, casting harsh gleams over dozens of faces wearing lipstick, pressed suits, and grins, as if they were watching a free show. But to Emily, those lights were blades. She tried to wipe her screen, pressing her lips together, forcing her breath to stay steady. "It's fine, it's just soda. Don't cry here." Vanessa looked down at her, her voice sharp as a razor. "That's the smartest thing you've done all day. Don't let your tears make a bigger mess." Laughter erupted again. A worker from another row glanced over and then turned away, shaking his head, but no one stepped in. Everyone at Brighton knew Vanessa was the team leader's favorite Brian Ellis's golden girl, and crossing her was professional suicide. Emily took a slow breath, folded her notebook, and stood up quietly. The cold liquid running down her sleeves made her shiver, but she didn't speak. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't ever let anyone decide who you are." Amid the whispers, she returned to her desk, grabbing tissues to wipe the drops of soda off the floor. No one helped. No one said a word. Only the soft office music and the clattering of keyboards from people pretending to be busy filled the silence. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "Look at her! She's more obedient than my dog." Blake burst out laughing. Lydia kept recording the glow of her phone screen flickering across her emotionless face. In that moment, Emily felt the entire room closing in on her. The air grew heavy. The chill from the air conditioner slipped down her neck, carrying the mixed scent of soda bleach and arrogance. Outside, Seattle's drizzle tapped against the windows. Droplets blurred with the sticky stains on her sweater, creating a smeared painting between her reflection and her shadow. She didn't know why she had chosen this place, a place where people only talked about brands, cars, and vacations in Bali, but she knew one thing: she would not let them take away the last bit of decency she had left. In her mind flashed the face of her husband, Ethan Harper, his calm smile, his steady, trusting gaze. He had never bragged, never told her to stop working. No one in this office knew Ethan was the CEO of Harper Holdings because she wanted to stand on her own. Vanessa suddenly slammed her palm on Emily's desk, her voice loud enough for the entire office to hear. "You don't belong here, Harper. This is a marketing firm, not a charity shelter. If you need to cry, go do it in the hallway. We're trying to work here." Emily looked up, a steady, silent, deep gaze. No anger, no defiance, only a stillness so calm it felt icy. Vanessa faltered. For a split second, what she saw in those eyes wasn't weakness, but a flame buried under the ashes of restraint. Emily turned away carefully, gathering her things, each paper, each pen slow and deliberate, as if preserving the last fragments of her dignity. When the elevator doors closed behind her, laughter filled the office again. But amid the noise, Vanessa felt a twinge of unease. She couldn't explain why that look had sent a chill down her spine, as if she had just provoked a force she didn't understand. Outside, as the Seattle rain kissed her face, Emily closed her eyes. The rain mixed with the soda sweet and salty on her lips. One thought echoed in her mind: I can endure it, but today might be the last time. The next morning, the Brighton Marketing Group office glowed once again under the fluorescent lights. High heels clicked across the white tile floor, the smell of expensive perfume mixed with the slow drip of coffee. Everything looked as polished, luxurious, and fake as it always did. Only Emily Harper, in her gray sweater and worn slacks, seemed out of place. She sat in the far corner by the window, where the view of Lake Union was blocked by the building across the street. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze, scattering faint rays of light across her desk. The papers that had been soaked yesterday were dry now, but the brown stain from the soda cans still showed clearly. Emily looked down and sighed quietly. It wasn't the stain that bothered her, but the feeling of being treated as one in the job she once loved. She loved numbers, loved how data told the real story behind the charts, but no one here cared about that. At Brighton, people only cared about who spoke louder, dressed better, and flirted with the right person. "Hey, Harper!" Vanessa's voice rang out from the front row. "Has anyone ever told you you look like a kindergarten teacher? Poor kids, they must have suffered." Blake laughed loudly. "If she were my teacher, I'd drop out on the first day." Lydia raised her phone, pretending to film something else, but making sure to capture Emily in the frame. Emily stayed silent. She knew that any reaction would only fuel their amusement. She lowered her head toward the laptop, her fingers trembling slightly as she typed lines of analytical code. The screen reflected her eyes, tired but still bright. Vanessa walked over, crossed her arms, and leaned against Emily's desk. "You do realize that everyone here fits in, right? And fitting in doesn't mean dressing like you just came from a thrift market." Emily looked up, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't come here for a fashion show. I came here to work." In that instant, Vanessa's smile froze. Brian Ellis, the team leader, had been standing nearby. He frowned and said coldly, "Vanessa's right. Harper, at Brighton, image matters as much as results. You should learn from your colleagues." "You mean be like them?" Emily asked. He shrugged. "I mean adapt, or you won't last long." His words landed like a stamp on her career file, a warning disguised as polite advice. During lunch, while the entire office went out to the Italian restaurant nearby, Emily opened her homemade lunchbox, brown rice, boiled eggs, and stir-fried vegetables. Lydia walked by, wrinkling her nose. "Wow, people still bring lunch to work. How do you even live off that?" "Maybe it's her way of saving energy," Blake chimed in. They both laughed and walked away. Emily said nothing. She closed the lid and looked through the glass wall at the people laughing outside. Inside, her quiet humiliation rose like smoke, but beneath it burned something steadier: determination. That afternoon, Brian handed her another pile of reports from another department. "You've got time, right? Handle these too," he said without looking at her. Emily bit her lip. "I have a deadline for the main project." "Then multitask," he interrupted. "At Brighton, the best carry the weaker ones. That's teamwork." "Teamwork?" she repeated softly, a faint, bitter smile on her lips. "Or exploitation." Brian turned to her eyes hard. "If you don't like it, you can leave." The air in the office froze. People glanced over but quickly looked away. No one dared intervene. Emily sat down and began working again, her eyes fixed on the reports. She worked non-stop, number by number, chart by chart, as if her silence was the only shield left to protect her dignity. Outside the window, the rain had started. Seattle rain was never heavy. It just fell endlessly quietly, like her own existence. By 7 in the evening, when the office was nearly empty, Emily was still there. The light from the monitor cast a pale glow across her weary face. Every keystroke echoed like a heartbeat trying to hold itself together. She remembered her first day on the job, how she had walked in with naive faith that hard work would earn respect, that kindness would be met with kindness. But here goodness only made her a target. A gust of wind slipped through the window crack, sending a sticky note fluttering to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, and on it, written in messy handwriting, were the words "Nobody likes the lower class." Emily stared at the note for a long time. She didn't cry. She just smiled faintly, a tired yet unyielding smile. "We'll see," she whispered. "Let's see how long this lower class can endure." She turned off the desk lamp and walked down the dark hallway, leaving behind the bright artificial office, a place where people showed off cars, clothes, and their lack of empathy. Outside, the rain kept falling, blending with her heavy breaths. And somewhere in the Seattle night, a luxury car turned into the building's parking lot. Its headlights swept across the words, "Brighton Group," glimmering like a promise of justice, waiting for its moment to arrive. Monday passed under the guise of normalcy, but for Emily Harper, everything had changed. The air in the Brighton marketing office felt heavier, damper, the kind of suffocating tension only those living it could sense. She arrived earlier than usual, hoping for a few quiet minutes before the storm of people began. But peace was something that never existed at Brighton Marketing. As she powered on her computer, a familiar voice came from behind her. "Well, look at you, right on time. Or did you just stay overnight?" Vanessa Price, her perfect blonde waves tight dress and bright red heels, appeared in a cloud of expensive perfume. Behind her was Lydia Brooks' phone in hand, eyes glinting with mischief. Emily turned, offering a faint smile. "I just came early to work." "Work?" Vanessa laughed. "You think anyone here cares what you can do? This place is for people with ambition, with style, not for someone plain and timid." Her words sliced through the morning like a knife. Blake Turner had just entered, catching the end of the exchange. "Easy, Vanessa. Maybe she's some hidden genius," he teased, then smirked. "Though with that worn-out handbag, I doubt she's hiding anything." Lydia quickly raised her phone, snapping a few pictures. #office reality, she murmured. "Let's see what the internet thinks about her fashion sense." Emily clenched her fists until her nails pressed into her skin. Every instinct in her body screamed to react, to shout, but reason pulled her back into silence. "Don't let them win. Don't let them see you hurt." Across the room, a few colleagues looked up and then quickly looked away. They weren't cruel, just afraid. At Brighton, silence was survival. Vanessa flipped through the papers on Emily's desk and sneered. "Oh, these data charts, who even understands them? What are you working on, counting how many people hate you?" Emily took a slow breath. "It's a client analysis report. I've already completed the main section. You might want to review it before sending it out, because there were a few errors in your previous version." The air went still. Vanessa stared at her blue eyes, widening for a second before narrowing coldly. "Are you saying I made a mistake? I just want the results to be better for the company." "How noble," Vanessa said dryly. "But I don't recall anyone asking for your opinion." Laughter rippled through the office again, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through dignity. Blake whistled. "Uh-oh, sounds like she's trying to teach the boss how to work." Vanessa smiled thinly, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder just lightly enough to pass for a gesture, but heavy enough to threaten. "Careful, Harper. I don't like people who cross lines, especially those who don't even know where they stand." The words, though softly spoken, hit like a weight, pressing her underwater. Emily sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she reopened her computer. The screen reflected her face, pale, but with eyes still steady. She worked straight through the morning, letting the taunts fade into background noise. But something inside her had shifted. It was no longer harmless endurance, but a quiet strength, forming the kind that grows only when a person has been pushed to their limit. By noon, the rain had started. Heavy drops tapped against the windows, blending with the chatter from the hallway. Vanessa and Lydia were having lunch with Brian Ellis, the team leader. From her desk, Emily could still hear Vanessa's voice drifting through. Honestly, I don't understand why she hasn't been fired yet. She makes the whole team look unprofessional. Brian's response was calm, but deliberate. Don't worry, I'm keeping an eye on her. We can't let someone unqualified hurt our reputation. The words cut into Emily like a blade of ice. Not qualified. The phrase echoed in her mind all afternoon like a verdict. By the end of the day, the office had thinned out. She packed her things, turned off her computer, and stepped into the hallway. Her reflection in the glass wall stared back, small, quiet, but unbroken. The elevator doors opened and she paused. The warm light reflected in her slightly teary eyes. Through the glass downstairs, she could see the rain still falling, luxury cars lining up to leave the lot. And in that fleeting moment, she thought of Ethan. His smile whenever she shared her stories from work, the gentle confidence in his eyes that told her she was strong enough to handle anything. "I'm fine," she whispered, as if answering a voice in her head. "I'm just getting tired." As the elevator doors slid shut, a faint vibration came from her pocket. She took out her phone. A message lit up the screen. "Ethan, I'll be home early tonight. I've got a surprise for you." Emily smiled a small, genuine smile. She had no idea that just a few hours later, that surprise would not only change her evening, it would change the fate of the entire Brighton office. Wednesday morning, the air inside Brighton marketing felt thick, as if something was about to explode. Emily Harper walked in clutching a stack of heavy documents in her arms, trying to keep her footsteps quiet. She wasn't afraid of laughter anymore, only of her own heart, one that was too tired of pretending to be strong. Vanessa Price stood before the conference room mirror, fixing her lipstick. Lydia Brooks sat nearby, scrolling on her phone, while Blake Turner leaned against the table, whistling along to a tune. When they saw Emily, Vanessa turned her smile sweet but her eyes cold. "Ah, the data girl is here." "Perfect! We were just thinking we needed someone to clean up a bit." Emily stopped. "I'm here to submit a report, not to clean." Vanessa feigned surprise. "Oh, you have an opinion. Wonderful, because we actually have a very important task for you." On the table sat a messy pile of old, outdated files filled with obsolete data. Vanessa pushed them toward Emily. "The boss wants a full review of client records from the last 3 years. I figured you've got time, so why don't you take care of this for us?" Emily glanced at the stack. "But that's not part of the current plan. I still have a deadline for this week's revenue report." Blake chuckled, his tone mocking. "You think your report matters? Everyone here takes on extra work. Either you do it too, or you prove you're useless." The air turned heavy. Emily took a slow breath, keeping her voice steady. "I'll help, but only after I finish my main task. I don't want to miss my deadline." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice slow and icy. "You know I really hate people who act righteous at work. Everyone here knows their place, except you." The words pierced like needles. Emily turned away, gripping the stack so tightly that the edge of the paper sliced into her palm. A thin line of blood appeared, but she didn't notice. At noon, Vanessa, Blake, and Lydia left for lunch at an upscale restaurant, leaving Emily alone in the office. She sat before the glowing screen, her eyes aching with exhaustion. Hundreds of data lines danced before her, but her mind was blank. She wondered if she really was as weak as they said, or if she had simply believed too much that good people would be treated fairly. The sound of the door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Brian Ellis, the team leader, walked in holding a cup of coffee. He glanced at her desk, saw the old files, and raised an eyebrow. "Vanessa asked you to redo those." "Yes. You should be more agreeable, Harper. We work within a hierarchy here. You're new, so you need to prove your cooperation." "By putting up with unfair treatment?" Brian paused, then gave a thin smile. "You're making things harder for yourself." He left, leaving behind the smell of coffee and a growing sense of humiliation that filled the room. By 3 in the afternoon, Vanessa returned. Seeing the unfinished pile, she tapped her nails against the desk. "You're too slow, Harper. I thought you liked numbers. The data formats are wrong. What I hear," Vanessa interrupted, "is you making excuses." Blake laughed loudly, and Lydia raised her phone pretending to record a vlog. A day in the life of Brighton's worst employee. "Lydia, don't," Emily began, but a tear had already escaped. She quickly wiped it away, trying to hide it. Vanessa smirked. "Oh, don't cry. Tears don't really go with gray sweaters." That sentence shattered the last piece of restraint left in her. Emily stood up suddenly. "Enough, Vanessa." Her voice echoed through the conference room, sharp and trembling all at once. "You can hate me, but don't belittle me. I work hard, and I've never disrespected anyone. If you need to hurt others just to feel powerful, fine, but stop stepping on people to do it." The room went dead silent. Blake's mouth hung open. Lydia stepped back, and Vanessa froze, her face flushing with rage. "Did you just talk to me like that?" "Yes, because I've been silent long enough." No one moved as Vanessa grabbed the can of Coke from the table, popped it open with a hiss, and flung it straight at Emily. The cold liquid splashed over her hair, soaking her clothes, dripping onto the floor. Vanessa tilted her head, smirking. "Now that suits you better." The room erupted in laughter. Emily stepped back, her tears mixing with the soda, her eyes red but no longer afraid. Something inside her had broken, and something stronger had awakened. She turned toward the door, her voice hoarse but firm. "Congratulations, Vanessa. You just gave me a reason not to stay silent anymore." Outside in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her hands trembling from anger, from pain, from humiliation. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message appeared on the screen. "Ethan, I'm in a meeting nearby. Are you okay?" Emily took a shaky breath, her tears falling onto her cut hand. "No," she whispered. "No, I'm not." And for the first time after months of enduring in silence, she pressed the call button. The call connected after only one ring. Are you okay, Ethan?" Harper's voice was low and steady, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of restrained fury. Emily bit her lip, trying to keep her voice calm. "No, they threw soda at me. In front of everyone. Her voice broke. On the other end, Ethan said nothing, and that silence was far more terrifying than anger. "Where are you?" "At the office, 21st floor." "All right. Don't go anywhere." "Ethan, you don't have to." He cut her off, his tone sharper than steel. 10 minutes. I'm coming." The call ended. Emily stared at her phone, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had never seen Ethan angry. He was a man of reason, always calm, always composed. But this time she could feel it, a storm was coming not from within her, but from across the city. She returned to her desk, pretending to work, though her hands trembled so badly that the cursor jumped across the screen. Around her, co-workers stole glances, some out of pity, others out of indifference. Vanessa, Lydia, and Blake sat at the far end of the office, whispering and laughing quietly, like a pack of predators savoring a victory. "She's probably quitting tomorrow," Lydia murmured. Vanessa smiled faintly. "Good. Brighton doesn't need people who make the company look cheap." Emily heard every word, but she didn't react. Inside her, the pain was being replaced by something else, a strange stillness, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then 10 minutes passed. The soft ding of the elevator echoed through the quiet office. At first, no one paid attention, but when the metallic doors slid open, every head turned. The man who stepped out froze the entire room. He was over 6 feet tall, his dark gray suit perfectly tailored over a broad, commanding frame. His dark brown hair was slicked neatly back, and his eyes were sharp as a blade. He didn't need an introduction. Everyone recognized him instantly. Ethan Harper, CEO of Harper Holdings, the parent corporation that owned Brighton Marketing. The air changed at once. The typing stopped. Even Vanessa's laugh died mid-breath, her smile faltering. Ethan didn't look at anyone else. His gaze locked on Emily, and he walked straight toward her, each step echoing heavily across the marble floor like the sound of judgment itself. "Are you all right?" His voice was low but clear enough for everyone to hear. Emily nodded weakly, her breath trembling. "I'm fine." Ethan's eyes swept across the room. "Who did this to you?" No one spoke. Silence thickened the air. Eyes darted away. Vanessa sat frozen, forcing a stiff, nervous smile. "Mr. Harper, I'm not sure what happened. It must be some kind of misunderstanding." Ethan's voice cut through her words, cold as ice. "A misunderstanding? I just heard my wife crying because she was humiliated in a company I invested hundreds of millions into." "You call that a misunderstanding?" The words my wife struck the room like thunder. Every breath caught. Blake's mouth fell open. Lydia dropped her phone and Brian Ellis stepped out of his glass office, his face pale. Vanessa stammered, "Your wife. She's your wife." Ethan turned toward Emily, his gaze softening just slightly as he nodded. "Emily Harper. My wife. The woman you all decided to turn into your office joke." The room shattered into silence. Blake tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't know. Didn't know." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Shall I pull the security footage?" No one dared answer. Lydia stared at the floor, her hands trembling, her phone forgotten. Ethan turned to Brian Ellis. "You're the team leader. How do you let something like this happen, a public humiliation of an employee under your watch?" Brian swallowed hard. "Mr. Harper, I truly didn't realize it had gone that far. If I had known—" "You knew," Ethan interrupted, his voice deep and cutting. "You knew, and you stayed silent. That's your failure." Vanessa finally snapped, her voice rising in panic. "She deceived us. She pretended to be poor, just to get pity." You only proved how small you are," Ethan said firmly. "She didn't flaunt who she was because she has character. You, Vanessa, seem to have nothing but cruelty." No one dared breathe. Ethan turned back to Emily, his tone softening once again. "What do you want to do? Stay or leave?" Emily looked around the room, her eyes shimmering but resolute. "I have no reason to stay here anymore." Ethan nodded. "All right." He faced the rest of the office, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "Then I'll help you clean this place up." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room like a verdict. "Anyone involved in humiliating her is fired, effective immediately." Gasps filled the air. Vanessa jumped to her feet. "You can't do that." Ethan looked straight at her, his voice calm but final. "I can, because I own this company." The office fell into complete silence. And in that silence, Emily realized this time silence no longer belonged to them. It was hers. It was her victory. The air inside Brighton Marketing Group froze, as if even the atmosphere was waiting to see who would break first. 4 people. Vanessa, Blake, Lydia, and Brian stood motionless before Ethan Harper, whose eyes held a chill sharper than the storm raging beyond Seattle's glass skyline. "You think this was a joke?" Ethan's voice wasn't loud, but each word landed with the weight of a hammer. "You filmed, mocked, threw things at one of your own employees. You turned a workplace into a stage for cruelty." No one dared meet his eyes. Vanessa tried to steady her breathing, her lips trembling. "Mr. Harper, I admit, maybe I went too far, but what?" Ethan interrupted. "You want to say my wife deserved to be humiliated?" Vanessa froze. A bead of sweat slid down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her blazer. Blake stepped forward hesitantly, his voice stammering. It was just a joke, Mr. Harper. None of us meant to actually hurt her. Ethan turned his gaze toward him so sharp that Blake immediately looked down. You call throwing things, filming it, and posting it online a joke around here? Does fun mean degrading someone for a laugh? The room fell utterly silent. A few employees standing near the back quietly turned away. The sound of Vanessa and Lydia's ragged breathing mingled with the heavy drumming of rain against the glass. Ethan moved closer to Emily, positioning himself in front of her. The light from the ceiling reflected off his shoulders, making him appear taller, stronger. You don't have to say a word, Emily, he said softly. I'll speak for you. Then he faced the room again. From this moment forward, Vanessa Price, Blake Turner, Lydia Brooks, and Brian Ellis, you are terminated. Effective immediately. HR will send your dismissal letters within 15 minutes. Don't bother pleading. Vanessa's mouth fell open. You can't do this. I've worked here for 6 years. Ethan arched a brow, his gaze cold. 6 years is more than enough time to learn how to respect others. Clearly you never did. Brian Ellis stepped in, his voice shaking. Mr. Harper, I take full responsibility, but please give me a chance to make things right. I didn't. Ethan cut him off, his tone sharp as a blade. You had chances, Brian. Dozens of them. Every time you watched her being humiliated and chose to stay silent, you lost them all. Lydia sank into her chair, burying her face in her hands. I only recorded the video. I didn't think it would be that serious. Ethan looked at her, his eyes softening slightly, not out of pity, but disappointment. Sometimes silence is more cruel than the act itself. Do you know why? Because silence allows cruelty to survive. No one dared speak. Vanessa clutched her handbag tightly, her voice breaking. You're just defending her because she's your wife. She's not as innocent as you think. Ethan met her eyes, his voice calm but piercing. You're right about one thing. She's not simple. She's strong, intelligent, and kind, qualities you'll never understand. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Suddenly she slammed her hand on the table. Fine. You fire me. I'll sue. I have proof you're favoring your wife. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his expression turning cold as stone. Are you threatening the majority shareholder of this company? Do you realize one signature from me can make sure you never work in this city again? The words hit like the final blow. Vanessa's face drained of color, her knees trembling beneath her. Blake stood, frozen eyes empty, while Brian could only bow his head, mumbling hollow apologies. Ethan turned toward the remaining staff, his voice deep and steady. I don't want a company where people are mocked for how they look, where cruelty earns applause. Anyone who stood by and said nothing today is the day you look in the mirror and ask yourself who you've become. His gaze swept across every face. Some lowered their eyes, others blinked back tears. In that moment, they realized what had just fallen apart wasn't only 4 careers, but the false culture they'd all pretended to believe in. Ethan turned back to Emily, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice softened. Let's go. We're done here. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. You didn't have to do this. I did, he said quietly. No one has the right to make you feel small. He took her hand and led her down the long row of desks. The room was so silent that the sound of their footsteps echoed off the floor. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan paused and looked back one last time. And one final thing he said evenly. From this day on, if any of you forget that respect is worth more than money, then you don't belong at Brighton. The doors slid shut. The office was swallowed by silence, the kind filled not with laughter, but with shallow breaths and the weight of fear. Outside, the rain kept falling, but for Emily, it was no longer a rain of humiliation. It was the first rain of freedom. The soft ding of the elevator echoed once more, but this time it wasn't to take them away, It was to bring in 4 figures in uniform. 2 men, 2 women security officers, their expressions cold and composed. The entire Brighton Marketing Group office froze in place. Vanessa Price was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, her voice shrill. "No one has the right to fire me. I've worked here for 6 years. Ethan Harper didn't even turn his head. His voice was calm, deep and firm. "Escort them out, now." The 2 male guards moved forward, faces expressionless. Vanessa backed away, her face pale. "You can't do this. I'll sue. I have rights." Ethan finally turned his eyes like ice. "You have the right to do anything you want, except to humiliate people in my company." Blake Turner tried to laugh weakly, his voice trembling. "Hey, I didn't really do anything. I was just joking around." Ethan looked at him. "You think adding fuel to cruelty is a joke? You should learn the difference between humor and malice." Blake lowered his head, his lips trembling. Brian Ellis stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Mr. Harper, I was wrong. But I have kids. I have a family. Please give me another chance." Ethan stared at him for a long moment, long enough for the room itself to feel suspended in air. Then he spoke quietly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I have a family too, and you let the person I love most cry in a place I pay for to ensure people are treated with respect. Second chances aren't for those who ignore what's right." Vanessa snapped, her composure shattering. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice shrill with rage. "She's nothing but a fake. She hid who she was to fool all of us. She doesn't deserve your sympathy." The words made Ethan turn completely around. He walked toward her slowly, his steps deliberate, stopping just a few feet away. Vanessa swallowed hard, but forced herself to hold his gaze. "She hid her identity." He set his tone low and steady. "Do you know why she did that?" Vanessa stayed silent. Ethan continued, his voice growing colder with every word. "Because she didn't want anyone to treat her differently. She believed a person's worth should be measured by their ability, not by the name Harper. But you turned someone's humility into your excuse for cruelty." Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Emily stood quietly behind him, her expression softening. She looked at the terrified faces in front of her, then at Ethan. Gently, she placed a hand on his arm and shook her head. "That's enough, Ethan." He turned to her, his gaze softening, though his voice stayed resolute. "No, Ra. I need to see this through. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been treated like you were." The 2 female guards approached Vanessa, each taking hold of one arm. Vanessa struggled, her voice cracking. "I'll come back. You'll regret this," Ethan replied, his tone steady and cold. "I've never once regretted standing up for what's right." Blake lowered his head and followed without a word. Lydia covered her face as tears streamed down, and Brian stood frozen, a hollow shell of guilt and defeat. When the elevator doors closed behind them, the sound of pleading voices mixed with the rain outside, creating a haunting symphony of collapse. The office fell completely silent. No laughter, no typing, only the rapid, uneasy rhythm of hearts beating a mix of fear and awakening. Ethan stood in the center of the room, his eyes sweeping across every face. "I don't want apologies," he said slowly. "I only want everyone here to remember one thing. A company is only strong when the people inside it are kind. If anyone believes power gives them the right to step on others, then walk out now." No one answered. Only a few teary eyes lifted toward him. A young woman at the back of the room spoke softly. "Sir, we're sorry, Mrs. Harper." Emily turned, her eyes glistening, and nodded with a gentle, tearful smile. "You don't need to apologize to me. Just remember, don't stay silent when you see something wrong." Her words carried through the quiet, like a small light breaking through the dark. Ethan squeezed his wife's hand, his voice warm again. "Let's go raw." They walked out hand in hand. The remaining employees slowly stood up. No one told them to, but instinctively they stepped aside, creating a clear path for the couple to leave. When the elevator doors closed behind them, Emily looked up at Ethan. "You know," she said softly, "I don't want them to fear you. I just want them to learn something." Ethan smiled faintly, his eyes filled with a rare gentleness. "I don't want them to be afraid. I just want them to wake up." Outside, the rain poured down the glass walls. Through that curtain of rain, two figures walked side by side, one who had been humiliated, and one who had used his power to protect her, blending together as a symbol of justice and compassion. That afternoon, the rain stopped, but inside those who remained at Brighton Marketing Group, the storm had not passed. Ethan Harper's voice still echoed in their minds, cold and sharp as a blade, along with the image of the small woman walking beside him. Emily Harper, her eyes glistening with tears, yet steady, unbroken. News traveled faster than the wind. Within hours, the entire office was silent. Whispers replaced laughter, guilty glances replaced disdain. Everyone realized that the woman they had mocked was the wife of the man who owned the entire building, a man whose single signature could decide the future of every person there. Vanessa, Blake, Lydia, and Brian were escorted out of the building under the gaze of all. No one spoke. No one dared to intervene. The same polished shoes that once clicked with arrogance now dragged heavily across the cold marble floor, carrying the weight of pride that had just been shattered. Emily didn't look back. She simply held her husband's hand tighter as they walked out the front doors together. Behind them, those who had laughed at her now lowered their heads in silence. It wasn't fear of Ethan Harper that kept them quiet. It was the reflection of what they had lost when they saw her compassion in a world ruled by ambition and deceit. As Ethan's car pulled out of the parking lot, Emily leaned back against her seat, quiet for a long moment. Her heart still raced, as if she couldn't quite believe everything that had just happened. "You didn't have to be that harsh," she said softly. "I didn't want them to lose their jobs." Ethan turned slightly to look at her, his eyes softening. "I know. But if I stayed silent, who would stand up for you? Who would stand up for the people who get looked down on every day? I just wanted respect, not revenge." "I know," he replied gently. "But sometimes, to reclaim respect, people have to understand what consequences mean." Emily lowered her gaze. In her eyes, a tear shimmered, catching the light of the sunset, streaming through the car window. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "Not because you defended me, but because you reminded me kindness doesn't mean silence." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand firmly. "I didn't protect you because you're weak. I did it because you deserve to be treated according to your true worth." The car drove through a street glowing under the evening lights. The sky had cleared after the storm, leaving behind the scent of damp earth and the gentle breath of the city. Emily looked out the window and saw her reflection no longer the timid woman who once endured humiliation, but someone who had risen standing tall beside a man who had made the world stop long enough to recognize justice. A new chapter was beginning, and she knew this time she would never stay silent again. The next morning, the Brighton office was no longer the same. Empty desks, abandoned swivel chairs. The places once filled with Vanessa and Blake's laughter now echoed with a heavy silence. No one said a word, but everyone knew that yesterday had become a turning point Brighton would never forget. The HR department released an official notice 4 employees had been terminated for serious ethical violations. The news spread across the city within hours. Other companies mentioned Brighton with caution, and the media called it Seattle's Office Justice Day. The once proud bullies had scattered. Vanessa tried to post a long explanation on LinkedIn, claiming she had been misunderstood and defamed, but no one believed her. The comments beneath were filled with sarcasm. "Now you understand what karma means, don't you?" Blake took a part-time job at a small cafe. Lydia deleted all her social media accounts and disappeared from the internet. And Brian, who once thought silence was safety, finally realized that silence could also be complicity. Meanwhile, Emily Harper never returned to Brighton. She declined every offer from the board to hold an honorary position. Instead, she chose to work independently, helping small businesses with data analysis, the thing she truly loved. To her, work was no longer about proving her worth, but about helping others see theirs. A month later, the Brighton incident was still being discussed as a lesson at business conferences. Many companies adopted stronger policies to protect vulnerable employees, while Emily simply watched from her screen, a faint smile on her lips. That night, as she and Ethan sat by the window of their high-rise apartment, the lights of Seattle stretched below them like a river of stars. She whispered, "You know, sometimes I think if that hadn't happened, maybe I would have kept enduring it, still believing silence was the safest choice." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice warm like the city's heartbeat. "Not every storm is a bad thing, Ra. Some come just to remind us how strong we really are." Outside, the night wind brushed against the glass, carrying the damp breath of the sea. And beneath the flickering lights of the distant skyline, Emily smiled the smile of someone who had walked through darkness and finally found herself again. On a quiet Sunday morning, the first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow across the Harpers' penthouse. The gentle sound of coffee dripping in the kitchen filled the air with a warm aroma that wrapped around the stillness of the room. Emily sat by the window in a soft knitted sweater, gazing down at the awakening city of Seattle. Everything seemed slower, warmer, and peaceful, the kind of peace she had earned with tears and courage. Ethan walked over and placed a cup of coffee in her hands. "I still remember the first time you told me about that place," he said softly. "You said Brighton made you feel small." Emily smiled faintly. "Not anymore. I don't need to prove anything to them or to anyone." "That's right," Ethan replied, taking her hand. "You don't need to raise your voice to be respected. Just by staying true to yourself, you've already won." She rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes drifting toward the clear blue sky. Outside, the surface of Lake Union shimmered in the morning light like a mirror of renewal. "You know," she whispered, "when they threw that soda can at me, I thought I'd never forget how it felt. But now it's different. It doesn't hurt anymore. I'm grateful because without that moment, I wouldn't have learned how to stand up again." Ethan looked at her pride shining deeply in his eyes. "The world will never run out of cruel people, but as long as there are people like you who dare to stand up, justice will never fade." Emily smiled, the morning light reflecting in her brown eyes. "I don't want revenge. I just want to live kindly, even if others choose not to be kind to me." Outside, the city began to stir. The sounds of car horns, voices calling, and the wind brushing through open windows filled the air. But inside that room, there were only two people holding hands, silent, yet unshakably strong. The storm had passed. The old wounds would heal. And from the ashes of humiliation, an ordinary woman had risen, becoming a symbol of dignity, compassion, and the enduring truth that justice begins with the courage to no longer stay silent. From the perspective of a specialist in corporate culture and human ethics, Emily Harper's story is not merely a triumph of justice, but a testament to a simple truth. Respect is not a privilege, it is the foundation of humanity. In any environment, when compassion is replaced by arrogance, that is the moment when true values must find their voice.